The house was the color of a little girl's birthday cake, soft pink, neat white trim. A postage stamp lawn that told neighbors the people inside kept their lives in order. Late one June night in Springfield, Missouri, police lights bled across that pink, washing it into the color of raw dawn. Officers stepped through a quiet doorway and found a bedroom still warm from sleep, a nightstand with pill organizers stacked like tiny calendars, and on the bed, a mother who would not wake again. There was no sign of struggle in the room. The violence had been swift, placed precisely in the kind of domestic silence where people are supposed to be safest. Her name was Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard, known on the block as the unbreakable mother of a permanently fragile child. She carried the weight for two, everyone said. The doctor's visits, the oxygen tubes, the wheelchair forever waiting by the door. Neighbors swore they could hear it hum when she pushed it down the ramp on bright afternoons. People donated, baked, prayed. The pink house itself was a gift, a monument to what compassion can build when a community believes. A few streets over, the glow of phone screens lit faces in parked cars. A social media post had gone up, something ugly enough to rip the air out of summer. It traveled faster than sirens, faster than rumor, and with each share, sympathy curdled into panic. Police traced, knocked, entered. In the bedroom, the mother lay still. In the living room, the wheelchair stood ready, empty. The girl everyone thought could not walk was gone. By morning, Springfield divided into two stories that could not coexist. In one, a sick daughter had been taken. In the other, a lie so large it required an entire town to carry would finally be set down. Behind the pastel walls, behind the devotion people had learned to admire, there was a ledger kept in the dark appointments that never made sense, diagnoses that dissolved under light, a child's voice that had been carefully taught not to trust itself. The first siren fades, the house waits, and somewhere, between the truth a mother told and the truth her daughter lived, a knife had cut a path out. Sometimes evil does not enter a home. It grows there, slow and methodical, until the people inside no longer recognize it as anything but love. By daylight, the Blanchard home looked like the postcard of a miracle. A pink bungalow with a wheelchair ramp, wind chimes, and a sign that read, "Home Sweet Home." To outsiders, it was a story of endurance, a mother's love against impossible odds. Dee Dee Blanchard was always smiling. Her soft Louisiana accent and tidy manners made people instantly trust her. She told neighbors that her daughter, Gypsy Rose, had been sick since birth. Leukemia, muscular dystrophy, asthma, seizures, a list that grew longer every year. Gypsy was small, pale, and soft-spoken, her head bald from chemotherapy. She wore oversized glasses that slid down her nose and rolled in a wheelchair wherever she went. Dee Dee pushed her everywhere, to doctor appointments, to charity events, to theme parks. When Gypsy smiled, people saw courage. When Dee Dee cried, they saw devotion. They were invited on stage at charity galas, flown to Disney World through the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and featured in local news stories as the sweetest mother-daughter duo in Missouri. The world looked at them and saw purity. But inside, something was off. Neighbors recalled that Dee Dee never let Gypsy out of her sight. Every conversation passed through her. She answered questions for Gypsy, corrected her when she spoke, and kept medical papers in thick folders no one was allowed to read. Doctors began to notice inconsistencies, test results that didn't match the symptoms, medical histories that didn't add up. But Dee Dee was persuasive. She moved hospitals often, claiming new starts or natural disasters had destroyed old records. She was always ready with charm and tears. When a pediatric neurologist suggested Gypsy wasn't really sick, Dee Dee vanished from that clinic and never returned. She filed new paperwork, found new physicians, and the cycle began again. Every night, Dee Dee crushed pills and fed them to Gypsy through a feeding tube. Every morning, she shaved Gypsy's head so the world would still believe she had cancer. She whispered, "You're my baby. You're safe with me. The world out there won't understand us." For Gypsy, that world didn't exist anyway. She believed her mother because that's what children do. She thought pain was normal, that tubes, needles, and fear were love. Behind closed doors, the pink house wasn't filled with warmth. It was filled with silence, beeping machines, and a mother's control that stretched over every breath. And yet, to the neighbors, the Blanchards were angels. They baked cupcakes for charity, waved at mailmen, and sent thank you cards written in careful pink ink. Everyone adored them. No one imagined that every smile was staged, that the perfect home had been built on a decade of lies. Le 14 juin 2015, Springfield, Missouri. The air was thick and silent, heavy with the kind of heat that makes even sound move slower. At 3 a.m., a neighbor scrolled through Facebook, saw a post from Dee Dee's account, and froze. The message read, "That B times H is dead. Asterisk, asterisk." At first, everyone thought it was a hacksome cruel joke, a sick prank. But as comments flooded in, another message appeared under it. I ding slash that fat pig, sweet little daughter. Asterisk, asterisk. The neighborhood erupted into panic. Friends began calling, messaging, knocking on Dee Dee's door, no answer. Hours passed. The pink house sat silent. By evening, 2 worried friends dialed 911. When police arrived, the door was locked, the windows dark. They forced their way inside. The air conditioner hummed. In the bedroom, Dee Dee Blanchard lay face down on her bed, a white sheet pulled up to her shoulders. The smell of iron filled the air. Her body bore multiple stabs. The attack had been violent, intimate. But what truly terrified the officers wasn't the body. It was the wheelchair parked neatly beside the bed, empty. Gypsy Rose, the girl everyone believed couldn't walk, was gone. An Amber Alert was issued. Posters went up. Social media exploded with prayers. Please bring Gypsy home. Reporters crowded the street outside the house, live streaming updates as the story spread across the country. And then, 48 hours later, the miracle no one expected and no one understood. Police tracked an IP address from one of the Facebook posts to a small house in Wisconsin. They raided it. Inside, they found Gypsy Rose. Alive, healthy, standing, walking. She wasn't kidnapped. She wasn't sick. And the man with her Nicholas Godejohn, her secret boyfriend, was covered in nervous sweat, his eyes wild. He confessed within hours. Gypsy told me her mother was evil, he said. She asked me to kill her. The country went silent. The headline shifted overnight from "Missing Sick Girl Found Safe" to "Daughter of Victim Arrested for Mother's Death." It didn't make sense. How could a fragile, wheelchair-bound girl suddenly walk into a murder scene? How could a mother so loving be the monster in the story? But the more investigators dug, the clearer it became. The truth wasn't simple. The crime wasn't clean. And the perfect mother had built a prison so complete that her daughter's only way out was through blood. The world watched in disbelief. The fragile girl, once confined to a wheelchair, now stood under the harsh light of an interrogation room. No tubes, no braces, no sign of illness. Her voice was small, trembling, but steady enough to dismantle everything the world thought it knew. "She made me do everything," Gypsy whispered. "She told me I was sick. I wasn't." With those words, 10 years of illusion began to crumble. For most of her life, Dee Dee Blanchard had orchestrated a perfect lie. She convinced doctors her daughter suffered from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, seizures, and a dozen other ailments. She carried binders full of medical papers, many forged, some outdated, most unnecessary. Whenever a physician questioned the inconsistencies, Dee Dee vanished. New hospital, new doctor, new diagnoses. Her charm, her tears, her story of a helpless single mother, it silenced suspicion every time. At home, control was absolute. Dee Dee decided when Gypsy ate, slept, spoke, or breathed. She shaved her daughter's head to mimic chemotherapy, fed her crushed pills through a feeding tube, and made her use a wheelchair she didn't need. Gypsy had no friends, no school, no ID, and no sense of how old she truly was. She believed what her mother told her, because the world believed it too. Yet, as she grew older, cracks appeared. When Dee Dee slept, Gypsy would sneak out of her chair, stand, and walk across the room. She began to realize the sickness was an invention, but realizing the truth didn't mean she could escape it. Every attempt to question her mother ended with threats, manipulation, or guilt. "The world will hurt you without me," Dee Dee would whisper. "I'm the only one who can keep you safe." Isolation turned into a cage without bars. But in the darkness of her bedroom, lit only by the blue glow of a laptop screen, Gypsy found a key. The internet became her first taste of freedom. There, she met Nicholas Godejohn, a man from Wisconsin. Awkward, lonely, fascinated by her story. For the first time, someone saw her not as a patient, but as a person. Their conversations grew deeper, darker. She told him about the lies, the confinement, the fear. Nicholas promised to rescue her, but Gypsy knew her mother would never allow it. So their fantasy of escape twisted into something irreversible. "You'll have to," she wrote. "It's the only way I can ever be free." On the night of the 14th of June 2015, Dee Dee went to bed early. The house glowed softly under the nightlight, walls painted a delicate pink, the same color as every lie that had coated their lives. Nicholas entered through the back door. Gypsy hid in the bathroom, covering her ears. In the silence that followed, the illusion shattered with a single scream. When it was over, Dee Dee Blanchard, the mother who had built her life on sympathy, was gone. Gypsy and Nicholas fled to Wisconsin, leaving behind the body, the wheelchair, and the past. But guilt doesn't hide well. 2 days later, Gypsy posted from her mother's Facebook account a cry that sounded like rage but was really desperation. "I wanted her to be found," she told police later. "I just wanted someone to know." The investigation confirmed what medicine had whispered for years, but no one dared confront. Dee Dee Blanchard suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care for attention and control. For a decade, Gypsy had been both daughter and prisoner. And when she finally broke free, it was not with a scream but with a blade. A single act that ended her captivity and began her infamy. The trial of Gypsy Rose Blanchard was unlike any other. It wasn't about who committed the murder that was already known. It was about why. When Gypsy walked into the courtroom in 2016, she looked nothing like the pale, fragile girl from the news. Her hair had grown long and brown, her skin was healthy, and her eyes, though still soft, carried the weight of a decade lived in someone else's story. She sat quietly, hands folded, as the charges were read. First-degree murder and armed criminal action. But as the evidence unfolded, sympathy shifted. The jury, the reporters, even the public watching from home began to realize this wasn't a cold-blooded killing. It was the aftermath of years of psychological torture. Witness after witness described the same woman, Dee Dee Blanchard, a devoted mother in the eyes of neighbors, but in truth, a manipulator who built her entire existence on deceit. Doctors testified that Dee Dee fabricated illnesses, forged documents, and drugged her daughter to simulate disease. Friends recalled how Gypsy wasn't allowed to speak for herself, wasn't allowed to eat without permission, wasn't even allowed to think she could survive alone. The courtroom heard about Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a disorder so rare that most people had never encountered it outside of medical textbooks. The diagnosis explained everything. The wheelchair, the feeding tube, the endless prescriptions, the pink house filled with medical equipment for a girl who was never sick. Dee Dee needed attention. Gypsy needed permission to exist. Her lawyer described her life not as childhood, but as captivity. He showed the jury photos Gypsy bawled, smiling weakly beside her mother, surrounded by donated gifts and hospital gowns. Then another photo, years later, of Gypsy standing unaided in handcuffs. It was the first time she'd stood for herself in every sense of the word. When Gypsy spoke, the courtroom fell silent. Her voice trembled, but there was no hatred in it, only exhaustion. "I never wanted her dead. I just wanted to be free." Her father, Rod Blanchard, sat behind her, weeping quietly. "I failed her," he said later. "We all did." The prosecution acknowledged the complexity. Even the state's attorney admitted, "This is not a typical murder case. This is a tragedy of abuse and desperation." In July 2016, after long deliberation, Gypsy accepted a plea deal. 10 years in prison for second-degree murder. She did not contest it. She didn't beg for mercy. Her only request was simple: to stop being called the sick girl. When the sentence was read, Gypsy whispered something almost no one heard. But a courtroom microphone caught it, a line that would echo across every documentary and interview that followed. "I feel freer in prison than I ever did at home." Nicholas Godejohn, her boyfriend and accomplice, faced a separate trial. His defense could not shield him from the brutality of the act. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Outside the courthouse, the world divided. Some saw Gypsy as a manipulator, a murderer. Others saw her as a survivor, the product of years of manipulation and fear, finally snapping under the pressure of her mother's control. TV hosts debated morality. Psychologists dissected trauma. But for Gypsy, the noise didn't matter anymore. Behind bars, she began to experience something she had never known before: choice. For the first time, she decided what to eat, when to sleep, what to say, and in those small acts, she began to rebuild what her mother had stolen: a sense of self. In interviews years later, She would say she wasn't proud of what she did, but she understood it. That, in the end, was the cruelest truth of all, that sometimes, to escape a cage, the only door left is one you have to break open yourself. Time has a strange way of softening what once felt unbearable. Years passed. The noise faded. The world moved on to new crimes, new monsters, new stories to be shocked by. But somewhere, behind the gray walls of a Missouri prison, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was quietly learning how to live for the very first time. No feeding tubes, no wheelchairs, no whispered reminders of illnesses that didn't exist. Just silence and choice. She read books about trauma, psychology, and forgiveness. She wrote letters to people who told her they understood, to girls who had lived under the same kind of control but never found a way out. She began to smile again, though guilt never truly left her. "I don't think anyone can understand what it's like," she said once, "to love your abuser, to miss them, to hate what they did and still wish they were here." Inside, she was serving time for a murder the world couldn't categorize. Outside, the story had already become legend, a case study, a documentary, a symbol. People debated whether Gypsy was a villain or a victim, but those labels missed the truth. She had been both. In December 2023, after 8 years behind bars, Gypsy walked out of prison. The cameras were waiting. She stepped into the daylight, blinking against the sun. Her hair brushed her shoulders. Her hands trembled slightly, and her first words to reporters were soft but steady. "I'm ready to start my life." She was 23 years old. For most people, that age means youth, opportunity, beginnings. For Gypsy, it meant starting from zero, learning how to trust, how to decide, how to exist without fear. There is a moment at the end of every true crime story where silence falls, not because justice has been served, but because no one knows what justice should look like anymore. Dee Dee's grave still sits under the Missouri sky, unvisited by the daughter who both loved and destroyed her. Gypsy's freedom is haunted by what it cost. The pink house where it all happened was torn down years ago. Grass grows where the wheelchair ramp once stood. Children ride their bikes past it without knowing that, for nearly a decade, it was a stage built entirely from Liza Monument to how love can turn into a weapon. In the end, there are no heroes in the story of Dee Dee and Gypsy Blanchard. Only victims of different kinds, a mother consumed by her need to be needed, a daughter who mistook violence for liberation, and a tragedy that asks a question with no answer: when the person who hurts you is also the one who keeps you alive. What does freedom truly mean? The echoes of that question still linger. They whisper through every hospital hallway, every case file, every family that hides its pain behind closed doors, because the most dangerous prisons are not made of walls or bars. They're built out of love and the lies we tell in its name.